On Friday night, March 14th, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that Iran is totally defeated and wants a deal, but not a deal that I would accept. Hours earlier, he said the U.S. had already destroyed 100% of Iran's military capability. Hours after that, Iranian cluster munitions rained down on multiple towns in central Israel, and Iran threatened to turn every U.S.-linked oil facility in the Gulf into what it called a pile of ashes. That is the gap we need to talk about today, because it is not a messaging problem. It is not a media distortion. It is a war that is behaving in a way that directly contradicts what the people running it are telling the public. And the consequences of that gap are now landing on populations from Tel Aviv to Dubai to every gas station on Earth. Let me show you exactly what happened this week, what it actually means, and where this is heading. We are now 15 days into Operation Epic Fury. The United States and Israel launched the conflict on February 28th, with nearly 900 coordinated strikes in the first 12 hours, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, his defense minister, his army chief of staff, and the head of the Revolutionary Guard all in the opening wave. The stated goals were the destruction of Iran's missile program, the elimination of the nuclear threat, and the creation of conditions for regime change. The White House projected 4 to 6 weeks to achieve its military objectives. 15 days in, Trump's own account of the war has shifted at least 5 different times. On day 2, he said it would take 4 to 5 weeks. 1 week later, he called it a little excursion that they were getting very close to finishing. Then he said the war would last as long as it's necessary. Then he said there was practically nothing left to target. Then on March 14th, he posted that Iran is totally defeated. NBC News reviewed the administration's public statements and described the messaging as a moving target, with officials giving contradictory takes that evolve in real time. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called that characterization a fake narrative. And then, the morning after Trump declared Iran totally defeated, Iran fired another salvo of ballistic missiles at central Israel. Here is what actually happened on Kharg Island, because it is being reported as a decisive American escalation. And in some ways it is, but the full picture is more complicated than either side wants to admit. Kharg Island is a small coral strip of land, roughly 5 miles long, sitting about 15 miles off the Iranian coast in the Persian Gulf. It handles approximately 90% of all Iranian crude exports. It is the economic spine of the Iranian state, responsible for roughly $53 billion in annual oil revenues, about 11% of Iran's entire GDP. For the first 2 weeks of the war, this island was left completely untouched. Then, on Friday, March 13th, Trump announced that U.S. Central Command had carried out what he called one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East. According to CENTCOM, the strike hit 90 Iranian military targets on the island, naval mine storage facilities, missile bunkers, an airport control tower, a helicopter hangar, the Joshan Sea Base. Iran's state-affiliated Fars news agency confirmed more than 15 explosions and thick smoke rising from the island. Here is what the strike did not hit: the oil. Not a single storage tank, not a pipeline, not a loading terminal. Trump was explicit about this. He said he chose not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island, and then immediately threatened to do exactly that if Iran continues blocking the Strait of Hormuz. So the message to Tehran was, we struck your most sensitive military installation on your most economically vital piece of land, and we deliberately left the thing you care most about intact as a threat. Iran's response came within hours. Tehran warned it would reduce every U.S.-linked oil facility in the Gulf to a pile of ashes if its energy infrastructure is touched. The IRGC named UAE ports, docks, and military shelters as legitimate targets. On Saturday, the UAE's air defenses intercepted 9 ballistic missiles and 33 drones launched from Iran. Fire broke out at Fujairah's bunkering hub, one of the Gulf's main oil logistics centers. After debris from an intercepted drone came down on the facility, a fire was also reported near Dubai's central business district. Satellite imagery, reviewed by tankertrackers.com, showed 2 tankers loading crude at Kharg Island just hours after Trump's bombing announcement. The deputy governor of Bushehr, the port city near the island, said Saturday that exports and imports were proceeding normally. So the island that Trump declared totally obliterated was back to loading oil within 12 hours. Now let's talk about the new supreme leader, because this is the variable that the White House expected to break Iran's coherence, and it has not. Mojtaba Khamenei, the 56-year-old son of the assassinated supreme leader, was appointed on March 9th, just 9 days after his father was killed. He has never held public office. He has never commanded troops. He is widely described as more hardline than his father by analysts who have studied his writings and speeches over the years. On March 12th, he released what Iranian state media described as his first public statement since taking power. It was not delivered on camera. It was not delivered in his own voice. A state television anchor read it aloud while a still photograph was displayed on the screen. Multiple news outlets noted that the format did little to address widespread reports that Mojtaba was injured in the same strike that killed his father, with some accounts claiming he was in a coma and others saying he had a leg amputated. An Iranian official acknowledged he was injured, but said he was alive and well. No footage of him has been released in 15 days, but the content of that statement is what matters most. He did not signal flexibility. He did not offer de-escalation. He praised Iran's armed forces, vowed to avenge every martyr, and said Iran would seek compensation from its adversaries, or, if refused, destroy an equivalent amount of their assets. He explicitly declared that the Strait of Hormuz must remain closed as a tool of pressure. He said studies had been conducted on opening new fronts, in which the enemy has little experience and is highly vulnerable, and he called on every Gulf state hosting U.S. bases to close those facilities immediately or expect to be targeted. Trump responded by calling him a lightweight, predicting he wouldn't last long, and threatening to hit Iran 20 times harder than it already has. Khamenei did not adjust his position. The missiles kept coming. There is a structural observation buried in this that analysts have been making quietly. Trump anticipated that killing Ali Khamenei would decapitate Iran's chain of command and produce chaos or capitulation. The U.S. National Intelligence Council had warned in a classified assessment completed in February, before the first bomb fell, that neither limited airstrikes nor a prolonged campaign would likely produce regime change. Multiple follow-up assessments have reportedly reached the same conclusion. The chain of command held. A successor was seated. The IRGC pledged allegiance. And Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said in an interview this week that he does not think talking with the Americans would be on Tehran's agenda anymore, adding that Iran had a very bitter experience in past negotiations with Washington. Here's the detail that no one in either government wants to address directly, because it changes the entire strategic equation. Israel informed the United States this week that it is running critically low on ballistic missile interceptors. U.S. officials confirmed this to Semaphore on Saturday. Israel had already entered this war with a depleted interceptor stockpile, the result of firing enormous quantities during last June's 12-day conflict. Israel's long-range aero defense system has been under sustained pressure ever since February 28th. Iran's increasing use of cluster-armed ballistic missiles is making the interception math even harder, because a cluster warhead that disperses before interception doesn't produce one impact. It produces dozens of smaller impacts, scattered across a radius that can stretch several kilometers. The U.S. has been aware of Israel's shortage for months. It's something we expected and anticipated, one U.S. official told Semaphore, adding that Washington is not facing a similar shortage of its own. The Center for Strategic and International Studies calculated that the U.S. fired over 150 THAAD interceptors in just the 12-day June 2025 war alone. The U.S. reportedly spent around $2.4 billion in Patriot interceptors in the first 5 days of this current conflict. In response to the Semaphore report, Israel's government held an emergency late-night vote and approved the transfer of roughly $826 million to its defense ministry for urgent and essential defense procurement. The Israeli government has not publicly confirmed the specific interceptor shortage. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth appeared at a press briefing and declared that Iran's entire ballistic missile production capacity has been functionally defeated. That same day, Iranian cluster munitions struck multiple locations across central Israel. This is the pattern that has defined 15 days of this war, a declaration of success, followed immediately by the thing that was declared defeated continuing to function. Let us look at the broader toll. Because when the official narrative drifts this far from the ground reality, the numbers become the most honest thing available. Iran's Ministry of Health reports at least 1,134 people killed and over 18,000 injured since February 28th. Human rights organizations put the actual death toll well above 2,400. The UN Refugee Agency says up to 3.2 million Iranians have been displaced from their homes. At least 56 Iranian cultural sites, including museums and historic monuments, have suffered serious structural damage. 31 major hospitals have been damaged and 12 are completely non-functional, according to Iran's deputy health minister. On the Israeli side, 14 civilians have been killed, over 2,300 injured to varying degrees, and more than 3,000 residents have been displaced by direct hits and interception debris. The deadliest single event remains the March 1st strike on Beit Shemesh, where an Iranian ballistic missile penetrated a communal shelter beneath a synagogue, killing 9 people, including 3 teenage siblings. 2 interceptors had been fired at that warhead. Both missed. Schools across Israel remain shut. In Lebanon, the death toll from Israeli strikes has reached 826 people killed and nearly 2,000 wounded since the war began. Over 820,000 people have been displaced. Hezbollah opened a second front on March 2nd and has been launching sustained rocket and missile fire at northern Israel daily since. 7 American service members are dead. At least 27 separate locations hosting U.S. military personnel have absorbed Iranian strikes. The U.S. embassy in Baghdad was attacked for the second time in 1 week as of Saturday, prompting the embassy to urge all American citizens to leave Iraq immediately. The financial cost of the U.S. military operation alone has exceeded $11.3 billion in the first 6 days, according to Pentagon testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee, making it the most expensive American military engagement since the opening phase of the Iraq invasion. The IEA's 32-member nations released a combined 400 million barrels from emergency reserves, the largest coordinated strategic reserve drawdown in the agency's history. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky told CNN this week that Russia is actively supplying Iran with Shahed drones to use against the U.S. and Israel. That claim has not been independently confirmed, but it introduces a variable that reshapes the logistics picture significantly. The Strait of Hormuz is where everything converges, and where the gap between declaration and reality is widest. Trump has claimed that the U.S. destroyed 100% of Iran's naval capability. He also said in the same breath that it is still easy for Iran to send drones, drop mines, or fire a close-range missile into the waterway, no matter how badly defeated they are. Those two statements are logically incompatible. Either Iran's navy is destroyed, or it isn't. If it is, the strait is open. If it isn't, something is being withheld from the public. Ship transits through the strait have fallen from over 150 vessels per day to single digits, according to maritime monitoring firms. 8 seafarers have been killed in attacks in or near the waterway since the war began. Iran has laid approximately a dozen naval mines in the passage. The U.S. destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels, but the mines those vessels already deployed are still there. Trump called on other nations, specifically naming China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom, to send warships to help keep the strait open. As of Saturday, none of those countries had indicated they would comply. Iran's foreign minister responded by telling Trump he was begging others and calling on Gulf neighbors to expel what he called foreign aggressors. The Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil and 1/3 of global fertilizer exports. The Fertilizer Institute warned that nearly 50% of global urea and sulfur shipments transit the waterway, threatening food production worldwide. Brent crude has crossed $100 a barrel. American gasoline prices have climbed 17% since February 28th. Here's where we are at day 15. Trump declared Iran totally defeated on Friday night. By Saturday morning, Iran had fired new missile salvos at central Israel. Cluster munitions hit sites in Shoham and Holon. No casualties were reported in those strikes, but IDF officials confirmed the use of cluster warheads and noted that interception debris caused fires across multiple sites in the Tel Aviv district. Iran's new supreme leader has not been seen on camera, but has issued statements vowing to keep the strait closed, open new fronts, and avenge every Iranian killed since February 28th. His foreign policy apparatus has declared that diplomatic talks with Washington are no longer on the agenda. His IRGC is actively threatening UAE ports and docks. His armed forces confirmed that Russia is reportedly resupplying drone stocks, and he explicitly warned that Iran is studying new theaters where the U.S. has, in his words, little experience and is highly vulnerable. The U.S. fired $2.4 billion in Patriot interceptors in the first 5 days. Israel is critically low on Arrow interceptors and has just approved $826 million in emergency defense procurement. The war has cost over $11 billion in 1 week for the United States alone. Both sides have struck each other's oil infrastructure. Both sides have buried command assets that the other cannot fully locate. Both sides are firing weapons that the official narrative of the other side insists should no longer exist. And neither side has produced a definition of what an acceptable outcome actually looks like that could withstand basic scrutiny. 15 days in, the math does not produce a clean answer. It produces a war running on momentum, generating casualties and economic damage at a scale that has not been seen in this region in decades, without a mechanism for stopping. That is the situation as of March 15th, 2026, not the one being described on Truth Social, not the one being argued over at press briefings, the one where the missiles keep landing, the interceptors keep running low, and a man nobody has seen in 2 weeks is promising new fronts and theaters where his adversaries least expect them. Follow this channel. Subscribe if you haven't. If you want to understand what is actually happening in this war, not the headline, not the press release, but the ground reality, you know where to find it. See you on the next one.